Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving into a truly fascinating and honestly foundational topic. Our main goal here is to map out the strict boundaries of jurisdiction, exactly as they're detailed in our source materials. We're going to take a really close look at the precise frameworks that separate the land, the sea, and the air, and we'll explore how those boundaries completely determine the laws that apply to everyday life. It's a surprisingly structured system, and laying it all out visually is going to make a world of difference. So, let's get into it.
Here is a quick look at our agenda. We're covering 1. Foundations of jurisdiction. 2. Land and sea jurisdictions. 3. Territorial and municipal jurisdictions. 4. Political statuses and jurisdiction. And finally, 5. Governance and practical significance.
Section 1. Foundations of jurisdiction. The original chain of title.
So, the source documents explain that sovereignty on the land and soil jurisdiction isn't just arbitrary, not at all. It's actually rooted in a highly specific sequence of foundational, organic laws and treaties. The text refers to this sequence as the original chain of title, and it maps out exactly how sovereignty was established. Starting way back in 1776, the Unanimous Declaration of Independence serves as the absolute genesis of the country, directly on the land and soil jurisdictions, deriving its authority from nature and nature's God. Then, moving along to 1781, the Articles of Confederation officially recognize free inhabitants. By 1783, we have the Treaty of Paris, where King George III officially recognizes the states as free, sovereign, and independent. Fast forward a bit to 1787, and the Northwest Ordinance provides the procedural authority for organizing states into the Union. And finally, also in 1787, the Constitution for the United States of America is established as the specific contract for the Federal Republic.
Now, a super vital concept tied directly to this land jurisdiction is the alla deal title. How does the source material define it? Well, an alla deal title is absolute property ownership, completely without any obligations to a government landlord. That literally means no property taxes and no external regulations. The documents actually trace this concept all the way back to the infancy of Teutonic civilization, stemming from the word otha, which means ancestral inheritance. Fun fact, that's also where the word oath comes from. Basically, it represents absolute dominion and stewardship over a specific portion of land.
Moving right along to Section 2, Land and Sea Jurisdictions, defining the physical boundaries.
A huge focus of the source material is this incredibly strict physical separation of jurisdictions. Essentially, different laws apply to you entirely based on whether you are operating on the land or on the sea. On the land side of things, the Union of States holds the national soil jurisdiction. This operates under the common law of the living people, utilizing juries, and this jurisdiction is populated by state nationals. According to the text, they are the inheritors of American assets and credit, and they operate entirely within this physical, soil-based framework.
Here is where it gets really interesting. When you change the jurisdiction, you completely change the law. For centuries, land law has been practiced in land jurisdiction courts by lawyers. But in stark contrast, sea law, which deals heavily with international commerce, is practiced in special maritime courts by attorneys, who are also known as esquires. The sources strongly emphasize that these are mutually self-exclusive jurisdictions. Simply put, you cannot be on the land and on the sea at the exact same time.
And to show just how specific the documents are, look at this semantic distinction. The two-word title, Postmaster of the United States, operates on the land jurisdiction. This role acts as a trustee responsible for well-being, peace, and order, an office that historically Benjamin Franklin held. Conversely, the single-word title, Postmaster of the United States, functions on the sea jurisdiction, specifically on the high seas and inland waterways to ensure freedom of transportation on the seaways. Just one space between words signifies a massive jurisdictional divide.
All right, Section 3. Territorial and municipal jurisdictions, the administrative subcontractors.
Okay, so beyond the physical land and sea, the source materials describe administrative, non-physical jurisdictions. You can think of them as subcontractors, specifically handling military and commercial structures. The text cites 3 totally distinct constitutions, which act as debt agreements or power-sharing contracts. First, the 1787 Federal Constitution established the federal branch for international trade and commerce. Next, the 1789 Territorial Constitution established the territorial branch, which the text notes was farmed out to the British to handle military and territorial property management. And lastly, the 1790 Municipal Constitution established the municipal branch, described as being left in the care of the Holy Roman Empire, to handle municipal and air jurisdiction business.
Drilling down even further, the sources define incredibly strict boundaries between those two specific subcontractors. The territorial jurisdiction utilizes the Uniform Code of Military Justice, or the UCMJ. This applies to British territorial U.S. citizens in a water jurisdiction. On the other hand, the municipal jurisdiction operates in the air jurisdiction and utilizes the Uniform Commercial Code, or UCC. The text states this applies to Papist citizens of the United States.
So, how are these jurisdictional boundaries practically enforced? Well, the text gives a really specific example. Let's say a summary trial notice is issued. According to the documents, it can be returned and boldly marked void for fraud. The reasoning here is that every judge must sign as a British territorial officer. But if a court attempts to bring a claim against a sovereign person without the proper standing or jurisdiction, that document can be absolutely rebutted and voided for fraud.
Section 4. Political statuses and jurisdiction. Who are the people?
With all these overlapping physical and administrative jurisdictions we've been talking about, we have to ask, how do individuals actually fit into this framework? The foundational element here is the crucial distinction between a person and the people. The sources emphasize over and over that sovereignty resides exclusively in the people. In legal usage, the term person is just a legal fiction, so statutes employing the word person are ordinarily construed to exclude the sovereign. That means standard statutory codes simply do not apply to the sovereign American people.
Based on these various jurisdictions, the source documents outline 5 very distinct political statuses. Let's run through them. First, you have the state national, operating in the soil jurisdiction as living people. Second, the state citizen, operating in the land jurisdiction with the specific duty to enforce the constitutions. Third, the federal United States citizen, which is described as an original dual status. Fourth, the territorial U.S. citizen in the British water jurisdiction. Now, the text specifically notes that this status has no constitutional protections. And fifth, the municipal citizen in the air jurisdiction, which also lacks constitutional protections. As you can see, the jurisdiction entirely dictates the legal protections.
And that brings us to Section 5, Governance and Practical Significance, putting it into practice.
Now, you might be wondering, how do the sovereign people actually govern themselves and handle their practical legal affairs purely on the land and soil? Well, the mechanism for justice on the land is the American Common Law Court. The text specifies that these are courts of general jurisdiction. They're highly unique because they are competent to judge both the law and the facts. Through jury nullification, a jury can overturn literally any law they deem unjust or void for vagueness. And most crucially, once a jury makes a decision here, it cannot be overturned. The engine behind these common law courts is the State Jural Assembly. The source material breaks its functions down very clearly. Unlike other assemblies, the Jural Assembly runs 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It takes up judicial issues affecting the people and enforces public law. Because these are people courts, they exclusively handle people's business. We're talking private property, marriages, and estates. They operate entirely outside of the corporate maritime system. Jurists for these courts are elected through standard public elections, which are restricted only to qualified members of the soil jurisdiction.
This whole framework is perfectly captured in this quote straight from the source material. It says, "Land law applies on land. Sea law applies on the sea. Air law applies to air assets, to spirits and energies and ideas. When you change the jurisdiction, you change the law." This absolute separation of jurisdictional realms is really the core takeaway of everything we've looked at today.
So, to wrap things up, the source documents we've explored today outline a highly specific, very rigid framework. They separate the original allodelic land and soil jurisdictions, which are governed by the sovereign people through common law, from the territorial military and municipal commercial subcontractors that operate under sea and air jurisdictions. It is a complex system of absolute boundaries. Which leaves us with a pretty fascinating question to ponder. Knowing how rigidly these jurisdictional boundaries are defined in these texts, how might this framework completely alter the way you view everyday legal encounters and government structures? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep learning and, as always, keep asking questions.